the respondents to your N-able, MSP Horizons report said that they expect to grow overall revenue by 20% or more this year, 2025. Fairly bullish, fairly optimistic, and I would say hasn't really changed even with all this tariff stuff going on. Agree, disagree?
I would agree with that. Only 4% thought they'd be flat or declining. So it's a very optimistic market. And we actually ran a panel on stage. I had two MSPs and I had Canalys up there. And I asked Rob Anodi from Canalys, what is your perspective? Has the world changed since November? A lot has changed, obviously, but has the optimism of the MSP space changed? And generally he felt no, maybe a slight degradation, but this is a very bullish market. And I think there's a lot of good reasons to be bullish on the market.
All right. Jeff Nulsen from N-able, welcome to the MSP Zone. Appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Charles. It's great to be here.
Yeah, did you just get back from Berlin? Or
it's funny because it doesn't feel that way. There's been a lot that's happened in the last 3 days, but we really had a great, referring to our customer conference, our annual customer conference, Empower, which was held this year in Berlin. We had over 600 attendees, amazing energy, some great announcements, some really, really great collaboration between MSPs, learning from one another, which is the whole intent of the show. Some excellent feedback, both reinforcing and a couple good ideas to make it better next year. So we come back invigorated.
Yeah, no, I was at the one in Frisco, and I desperately wanted to be there at Berlin, but I had some scheduling conflicts. But yeah, the food, the culture, the beer, right? What's not to like about Berlin?
That was the main selling point for sure. There's a lot of good culture and history as well. It was nice.
And I heard you guys are going to be in Fort Lauderdale next year.
We will. Yeah, nice,
it's
sunny.
Exciting.
We'll hopefully get out on the water and do something fun.
Yeah, awesome. I know we're going to talk about your MSP Horizons report because there's a lot of good data I want to dig in with you. What was I know that this the Berlin Empower was more focused to Europe, right? I mean, slightly more dominant in terms of a European type of attendee. Anything that you spotted that was of interest or noteworthy that you wanted to pass along from the conference?
I think thematically, it's going to be very close to what the MSP Horizon report talked about. So there was a lot of discussion about cybersecurity and how to both leverage that as a tailwind to grow your business, and as well as quite a bit of concern about the fact that they're in the supply chain and they need to be thinking about how to build their own security systems to ensure that their business have continuity and continue to grow and do all the things they want to do. So that's big theme. We talked a lot about AI. We talked a lot about compliance. We talked a lot about the general challenge of growing their businesses, whether that has to do with new customer acquisition or expansion or M&A as a key lever. Those were really core topics, and most of the discussions happened between the peers, right? Like we always say the answer is not on stage, the answer is in the room, and that's what we're trying to facilitate. Really, is that peer-to-peer discussion.
Yeah, no, it's a good conference for those who haven't been, and I'm definitely looking forward to Fort Lauderdale next year. So I'm really curious about this report. I'd like to ask, because I'm talking to a lot of MSPs, as I know you do. When was this taken? Just because I want to match this up with kind of current economic, political, timing.
Things have changed in the world. So November. Right. November of 24 is when the data was collected, but it was only published a month ago or so.
Even still, I don't think that there's anything in here that I'm looking at that has changed. And I'm talking as of even like a week ago. I'm talking to MSPs pretty regularly, and they are fairly bullish. Now, there was one in Toronto that was a little tweaked about things. That's understandable. Let's just start with the kind of the the headline grabbers here. 59% of the respondents to your N-able, MSP Horizons report said that they expect to grow overall revenue by 20% or more this year, 2025. Um, Fairly bullish, fairly optimistic, and I would say hasn't really changed even with all this tariff stuff going on. Agree, disagree?
I would agree with that. Only 4% thought they'd be flat or declining. So it's a very optimistic market. And we actually ran a panel on stage. I had two MSPs, and I had Canalys up there. And I asked Rob Anodi from Canalys, what is your perspective? Has the world changed since November? A lot has changed, obviously, but has the optimism of the MSP space changed? And generally, he felt no. Maybe a slight degradation, but this is a very bullish market, and I think there's a lot of good reasons to be bullish on the market.
I've heard from MSPs that are more exposed to reseller revenue, like they're more on they have a sizable portion of revenue coming from VAR activity, and certainly that could be something that is impacted by these tariffs, from a tax cost standpoint. But the MSP that is dominant in managed services revenue, of which I know N-able has plenty of those types of more pure MSP plays. They shouldn't be looking at anything that really is seeing negativity. I'm not getting into the politics or economics of tariffs. I'm just saying they're not saying this is going to be bad. Now their customers could be going through something, but the MSPs I think are solidly, this is going to be a good year.
I believe so. What we found was the folks who are verticalizing or specializing are the most bullish of that bunch. And I think there's a lot having to do there with their ability to build capabilities and products and services that meet, really good product market fit, their expertise in delivering those because they're so focused lends itself to referrals, lends itself to the ability to speak to the next potential customer with such confidence and insight into the way they run their business that it really just has this compounding effect, the snowball effect of delivering a great service and building a business, not easily, but more easily than folks who are not verticalized or specialized.
I think it's a really good point, Jeff. It's not that it's easy to do, and it's not that, as someone I just spoke to commented, MSPs are not recession proof. They're recession resistant, and I love that distinction because it really speaks to the genius or the position of the MSP business model, that it's really solid, and even in a tumultuous year, an MSP can bring a great amount of predictability, financial and IT and security predictability to a customer. And that may not mean a lot when they're dealing with tariffs, but it may mean a lot to them when they have a sector of their business that is just operating as it should with no real ups and downs.
I 100% agree. And I think one of the advantages that folks have who are specialized or verticalized is they're likely to be working with, let's take verticals, financial services or healthcare, manufacturing, folks who have got compliance in place or insurance policies in place that will dictate the decisions they make around their managed service offering. In other words, it won't really allow them to think about that as a lever if they need to pull a lever on cost because of a recession or because of a downturn.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's good point. Another bullet point here is roughly 40% of the MSPs responding to this said that they expect more than 20% managed services profit growth this year. I won't say the name, but there's been some scuttlebutt over the last year and a half of some executives in the MSP space claiming that MSP margins are eroding or at very, very low, single digit levels. And I I don't share it, but I'm glad to see that at least your report says the opposite is true.
Well, I mean, so here's what we see, because we do benchmarking, and so we've got over 200 MSPs who've done an operational efficiency benchmark with N-able, And you see all ends of the spectrum, obviously. The folks who are doing best, when you look at the net fully loaded labor margin, is somewhere the best of the best are like 20% plus. Now, again, that's fully loaded net EBITDA that they're driving into their
Gross
business,
margin,
not gross
different
margin.
than gross. Yeah.
Below the line of gross margin, yeah, they might be 40 or 50% gross margin, but after all of the other elements of their business, they get down into the 20. There are folks who are negative. There are folks who are in the single digits, and we oftentimes find that, not surprisingly, the reasons for that are either pricing or efficiency related. They're either charging when these individuals get in a room together and they say, hey, why are you up there at 20% and I'm down here at 3%? Let's talk about pricing. How do you price on a per user basis? What does your packaging look like? Let's talk about efficiency. How many techs per users do you deploy? And what are the automation mechanisms that you employ to allow for that type of tech per user? Because labor is such a large part of the cost, those are some of the meaningful levers that we hear about.
Yeah. No, it's an important point. You there's obviously been a large focus on endpoint management now that the network has kind of evaporated. Since pandemic, right? I mean, the traditional office, even though it may be coming back, I think there's still plenty of holdouts, working remotely. But even if they were in the office, endpoint protection is still critical. You guys bought Adlumin last year, strengthening your MDR play. How's that been going, and what's the response been from the MSPs in your community?
It's been massive. So interestingly, this is one of those data points that says what we wanted it to say, or hoped it would say, which was when we polled around which are the services that you expect to offer in the future that you don't offer today. MDR was number one on that list. Outsourced managed detection and response, and why? Because obviously the bad actors are only getting more and more sophisticated, particularly with their use of AI. And because MDR is becoming more and more accessible to the market, right? From a pricing and just from a value standpoint, that I think they're starting to understand the need for it, and it's becoming a little bit more accessible. So we've had absolutely tremendous response to the offering, both in terms of demand and the level of satisfaction and happiness with the product itself. AI is a really important part of that story too. We've obviously got a SOC component, we've got a SIM component, we've got a lot of automation and SOAR built into the product. But over the last 2 years in particular, AI has become a much bigger part of the story. And what we're finding is that while as 2 years ago, it might take up to 90 minutes for a human to detect a threat, now it's 10 seconds with AI. It's 10 seconds. It's
Yeah,
incredible.
I mean
Um,
that it's a game changer. Yeah,
and when you think about the bad actors, they're using AI, and if we're finding that once they get in, they can move laterally as quickly as 8 minutes. So they enter however they enter, through the endpoint or through the cloud or through the network or somewhere else. Once they move laterally, they have so much opportunity to start covering up their tracks. They have so much opportunity to further damage things. They're obviously going to try to get credentials for admin rights and other things. They're going to go after the backup. If they're doing ransomware, 94% will go for the backup, because they know that if they destroy the backup, they have a lot of more leverage when it comes to the ransomware. And so you got to battle AI with AI. And if you're not, I think if you're an MSP and you're not deploying MDR, first of all, you got to really, or you don't have your own SOC, you really got to think about what you're missing out on there. And secondly, even if you are, you got to make sure that your vendor is moving forward in a very meaningful way with AI. We get 70% of the alerts and remediations are actually delivered through AI with our MDR, which is
it's incredible.
extremely.
Um, I want to dig into that because I'm thinking back 15, 20 years when antivirus software was, coming into its peak, and maybe because of the price point, it never really seemed that antivirus there wasn't a barrier to entry. Like MSPs didn't really have a problem bundling that, selling that into customers. In fact, many of them just did it and they said, hey, look, you're going to get a price increase. Are you seeing that same thing happen? Although there's a different price point for things like MDR, right? There's like the AI component really was never there, wasn't a factor with AV. Is that same thing about to happen with MDR, in your opinion?
I think so. I mean, the price points are they're different for sure, but there are packages. There's levels of MDR that you can sign up for that are meaningfully different. We just launched something called M365 Breach Prevention, which is really just pointed at Microsoft and identity, which is the number one threat vector. And so many of our MSPs are and their customers are using Microsoft, obviously. So there's a huge opportunity to be smarter, and that's a different price than if you want to look across networks and you want to look across firewalls and clouds and really full data ingestion, which many folks who have certain compliance or regulatory needs or insurance needs need to do, but not everybody does. And so what we're finding is that if you're an MSP and you're building a security offering, you have a component of that may be your own SOC, which is very expensive to build, but can be done, or is outsourced to an MDR provider. One thing you're going to really want is the ability to not just resell, right? Like there's not going to be great margin in that. And you're going to probably at some point get exposed a little bit around how much service, how much value am I really bringing to the table? So one thing to look out for, and this is something that we do, is we will deliver not only the MDR, the service component, but the SIM. So they get full visibility into all the data, all the alerts. They may not want it at times, but they can see. And if they want to build a capability internally, either as a go-between or as partial mechanism to delivering against that MDR service, they've got that capability. They've got the reporting. They are able to actually show up and demonstrate some level of insight and expertise. But I'd be wrapping that into a much broader, it's not just the MDR. You need to be ready in case something does slip through. You got to have data protection. Before that, you got to make sure that you've got all the mechanisms in place to do patch and vulnerability management. Like, package that up into something that has margin and has your service component built into it, kind of per your point when we started the conversation.
You're baking a cake. You're not selling flour. Is kind of what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
All right, difficult question. Answer to the best of your ability. The MSPs that are doing it really well and are doing exactly what you said, Jeff. Right? They're building in best of breed technologies. They're not reselling it. To your point, it's integrated. And the MSPs that are not getting it, is it that the MSPs that are not getting it don't understand how to do the integration, or is it that they can't convince the customer of what MDR really means and how dangerous? Because I'm wondering if it's a bundling issue or if it's an end user recognition issue, or maybe a combination of both. If that makes sense.
I was going to say yes. I think it's
Yes, there you go. Best, yeah.
I do think it's both. Part of this gets back to verticalization and specialization, to the extent that you can identify ideal customer profiles who are going to have a higher likelihood of needing this. You're going to be more likely to be able to convince them of it. And you may be stealing business, that you may actually have to be stealing business. But if you've built a great capability, we heard a lot of this at Empower, that MSPs are now at the point where, 5-10 years ago, it was greenfield. It's much more of a red ocean, and they're stepping into other people's estates and finding some problems. In many cases, they're leading with security, and they're going into somebody who just led with IT. And it's very easy for them to say, hey, let me run a scan for you and show you how many vulnerabilities you have in your system. Is your current MSP managing that? It's a real risk. If you're not investing in security, your lunch is going to get eaten. So I went a little bit off topic there, but like I think that's a path to think about if you're an MSP is the specialization, the verticalization. It can help solve both of those problems that you reference. Like, do they know how to build it and package it? Well, if you're specialized or verticalized, you're going to get smarter about that. Do they know how to sell it? If you're thinking through who you're targeting, it's going to be easier. Both
Yeah.
both both are hard. They're both hard, and one of the things we try to do is help educate around that just through the conversations we do have with folks who are doing it well.
It's Yeah, it's not easy, Jeff. I recognize it. And any MSP listening to this, it's not easy. But I think that the good thing is, and this dovetails to the next bullet point I want to mention, is that everybody in the world, except for the bad guys, everybody in the world wants MDR and other types of. It's not just a silver bullet, but it's MDR and a full complement of solutions that will make everyday organizations, including the smallest out there, more resilient to inevitable attack and getting back on their feet, or never getting knocked off their feet to begin with. And your data point says cybersecurity managed services sales growth is expected by 90% of the respondents that you polled in 2025. 90% of them expect
Yeah,
security growth to go up.
that was an over the next 3 year data point that 90% believe over the next 3 years. Now, what's interesting is half of that would say we're already doing it. We're already growing significantly with cybersecurity, and we think it's going to continue. The other half of that 90% is new to it. So if you're in the 10% of MSPs who's not thinking about growing with cybersecurity, you are very much in the minority. And I think that scenario I just described is probably one that you should be very worried about, where somebody comes into your estate and can easily demonstrate there's a lack of security, there's a vulnerability, there's something going on with identity that would easily demonstrate something that's problematic.
Now, I've heard some MSPs facing challenges, I'll put it that way, challenges from security consultants who are not doing anything on the managed services side. They're not doing anything. They don't touch IT. And they're coming in, they're trying to, tap into this obviously very swift moving economic river that we're watching. Are you guys monitoring that at all? Like, are you aware of that as a force?
What do they offer? Like, are they pitching something?
Like mostly point solutions like vulnerability scanning. Maybe they resell an MDR, and I think most of it is a resold product, but there's no managed services capability. But it gets to your point earlier that there's a small percentage, like 10% maybe, of MSPs out there that are just not doing anything, that may have caused this type of security consultants weed to grow, sprout up all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't heard much of that one. The thing we hear is that is a little bit different, I think, but MSPs might carve out a portion of their offering and bring it through co-managed to like the mid-market. N-able could be a candidate for, given our size and scope. Like, somebody could come to us and say, we think we figured out how to do patch better than anybody in the world. Would you like to outsource your patch to us? We think we figured out help desk, or we figured out data protection, or some component, or if you're smaller than N-able and you don't have something internal, they're it may be the full suite, which is really more the typical approach.
Yeah. How do you manage? Because N-able, you do everything. You've got RMM, you've got password management, you've got backup, you've got MDR now. So you've got the fundamentals there. How do you keep? Because right, the message is not all right. You don't have to worry about or slack off on password management or user access or backing up data. I'm going to focus only on MDR. Right? It's everything has to be in play, right? And how do you keep that? Don't let off the pressure. Don't give up on the other stuff that has to be there. You know, it's not one or the other.
Well, I will say more and more, maybe I'm not sure if it's the majority at this point, but it's getting real close to it. Of the MSPs to have a package that they do not allow, have a minimum package that you cannot work with me unless you put these 5 things into it. And a lot of those are the things that we sell, and many other people sell too. Um, but that's like, hey, man, you got to have backup. You got to have RMM. You got to have MDR, EDR. There's some standard set of things. And it's a very hard thing to say no to somebody, but they're not willing to take the risk on themselves, because there is risk of just signing somebody up with antivirus for not just for the end customer, but for the MSP too, because if the end customer is breached, well, that's an indicator of the MSP. Like, people will find out about that, and it could hurt them. So that's a hard thing to do, and I think it's particularly hard with the existing customer base. How do you take, well, maybe I can do it for all my new customers, but what about my existing customers? But it does take, some fortitude.
I always like to say, yeah, at some point there was a doctor out there that said, you know what, I got to start washing my hands before I see patients. Last week maybe I didn't do it, last
Right.
year, but
Yeah.
today I'm washing hands, and that's the
Well,
practice from now.
it's a great analogy, and we got a guy, I think Rob Wilburn here, who does a lot of our business transformation programs, and he got up on stage at Empower, and he talked about growth, and he showed a lot of data points because we had this benchmark. One of the things he said was, most MSPs who come to him talking about growth, they actually don't use the words growth. They say, my problem is new customer acquisition. And he says, okay, are you expanding your existing customers? Well, I'm talking about new customer acquisition. Well, what have you thought about ways to expand your existing customers? That might be an easier path, or secondary dual path to growth. And this play, a lot of the MSPs who are doing it successfully, hard, I get it, really hard, but still it works. They are going into their existing customer base and saying, hey, it used to be okay for you to have this package. It's not anymore. And I'm not going to have you as a customer unless you do this package. And it is going to cost you a little bit more, but your business is going to be safe. It's going to operate more efficiently. You're not going to, like, you can sleep at night. That type of pitch is resonating, is working.
MSP's evolving, and I have to imagine that a little bit of peer pressure can be a really good thing, especially when they go to a conference like Empower, and they're maybe in that 10% bucket, or maybe they are just lagging a little bit behind in their particular market. Maybe they don't have as many regulated customers, but it's good for them to hear from I know a lot of N-able MSPs who are taking that bundled approach, and they're very disciplined about it, and they're not, as far as I've heard, struggling for growth. They're not having those types of issues. They have other issues, but they're not really worried about that because they've got a good product bundle.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a very difficult thing to get over the hump of trying and doing and being committed to, because the first or second try at it, you might get a lot of pushback. You haven't perfected the pitch, you haven't perfected maybe even the offering, but like sticking with that and really being committed to that as both a growth mechanism and as a mechanism of securing your customers to a higher degree, I think is an important thing for the industry.
I don't know if you segmented the report based on geography, but I'm just curious as to your thoughts about, if you had a slightly more European dominant audience last week, any distinctions that leap out in your mind of how the European MSP market's doing relative to, let's say, North America?
I think the market's doing well. I'd say there's some nuance in maturity that still exists in different markets within Europe, and so markets like the UK and Benelux are a little bit further along, and some markets further east are a little bit less further along, which just means great. Kind of, there's more green space to go acquire, right? A little bit easier, a little bit less of that red ocean. Data sovereignty, I think, is a really big topic in the European markets, and probably increasingly so with some of the geopolitical stuff going on. So that was a hot topic. We heard quite a bit about that. The other thing we hear about is they want vendors with people in their markets. Like, it's still a relationship when it comes to the vendor and MSP, relationship matters. Obviously, the technology and the service are the things that matter most, but the relationships matter too. And there is a desire for that from those folks, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. It matches up to what we see as well. Um, so obviously, this is a very security dominant report, meaning that the metrics here are touching on the security aspect. As as we, my personal take is the growth potential there for the MSP is for getting the low hanging. They're not really low hanging fruit, but they're the accessible smaller organizations that are all over, certainly North America, but they're all over the world, that are completely vulnerable to cyber attack and not doing anything currently to stop it. Like there's nobody there to displace except maybe a part-time internal IT person or IT shop, but they're just completely wide open. Do you have any thoughts, or have you heard any scuttlebutt amongst your partners about tapping into those kind of typically resistant, maybe not historically managed services customers, but they desperately need an MSP?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say that exists more in certain markets. My Based on the conversations I've had, it seems like that opportunity exists more in some markets than others. And while it used to be this world of like go gobbling up folks that knew they needed something, probably didn't know what an MSP was, but were happy to have somebody knock on their door and say, we can manage this for you. I think there's just not a lot of those folks that are left. They exist, new businesses, some folks who are like the holdouts, or maybe they're only got a portion of the IT being managed and they're not managing something else. But I would say if you can identify those folks, that's a really nice low hanging fruit to go after. I don't know what you think about that, but
Yeah.
that's seems like
Yeah,
a good.
I'm talking about like in the U.S. the CISA, right, the agency that handles a lot of the cybersecurity information clearing. Um, you know, our talks with them have been very clear, right? They're concerned about hostile nation state threats that are indiscriminate and not just going after the big prime, DoD vendors. They're worried about them going after Main Street businesses, going after Main Street public sector utilities, or public sector government, local counties, local governments, that type of thing. And
Yeah.
I know that a lot of those are not tended by existing MSPs, and I think that that's just a massive, not
Are
exclusive
they
to the
not
US at
tended at
all.
all? Is your experience that they who's managing, or is nobody really managing the security in that case?
And well, anecdotally, what I believe is happening is you have internal IT that is understaffed, undertrained, under resourced, all the typical stuff that you and every other MSP on the planet know so well, right? They just don't have enough resources to do what they need done, and it's partly a budget issue. And I think a lot of it could be viewed as budget. But like, there's one massive attack in Arkansas that happened with I call it a government in a box software, and it was the software vendor that was managing the software for the different counties, and they let ransomware attack came in, they completely got owned, and but there was no MSP in sight. And so that's kind of very preventable stuff that I think
Yeah.
that speaks very well to the point in the MSP Horizons report. It's stuff that is achievable. The MSPs just got to get there fast.
Yeah. They should attack that market for sure. I don't know how you identify it, but it's I mean, look, like some of it's identifiable because to your point, if they're providing some sort of infrastructure type of service, they're probably likely to be a target. And I think you're right. If they're of a certain size, their budgets are of a certain size, their focuses are limited as a result of that, and they may not be focused on this, which makes them very much a prime target for somebody who's smart enough to figure that out.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah,
Jeff,
great
I want
point.
to I want to get back to your comments around AI, because I think that's a really powerful message about staffing has always been an issue with MSPs. You probably track that as well as anybody. Um, I don't look at AI as being a threat at all to MSPs. In fact, I look at it as you finally get to free up. I think you had mentioned something like some 80%. You said of vulnerabilities are being remediated or identified by AI.
70. Yep, 70% of them
70.
through the MDR.
I mean, that to me screams, why wouldn't you put MDR in all your customers and free up some of your level ones to do more important, work, right? Or it's not to get rid of people and cut costs. It's to free up existing resources and put them to places that you need even more growth or attention. Is the way I look at it.
I think that's right. We know that finding a technician is one of the hardest roles to find in the world. Finding somebody who knows how to be an IT person, let alone how to be a security ops person, is literally, the data supports it, one of the most difficult roles to find in the world. And the number of job postings far, far outweigh the number of candidates that are available for those job postings. So I did not hear 1 ounce of concern at Empower around AI stealing jobs anytime soon, at least. Let's put it that way, right? I heard a lot about AI being leveraged for some of the things that many of us do within the business, whether that as a marketer has to do with generating content or customer service, or in some cases, managing the flow of tickets. If there's some levels of sophistication, they may be actually, whether it's through vendors or less frequently, but sometimes they've built their own code to leverage the AI to actually take action and run remediation or close tickets or isolate or whatever it needs to do. We also asked about, are you out there selling AI services? Are you offering AI as a service? Like many of them now are doing compliance as a service. Are you doing AI as a service? Not really. Not really yet. What they're hearing interest from their customers around is like, how do I use Copilot? What are the use cases? And many of them are just offering up a little bit of advice around that. Some are starting, but it's definitely the minority who are thinking about, and they're mostly trying to think about, it's really interesting, how do they solve a problem within their customer's business with AI technology, custom built, right? So they are really thinking as business partners around a big business opportunity and the role that AI and technology in general can play in delivering against that opportunity, which is an interesting one for them.
Yeah, definitely. Do you see, and this may already, I'm not aware of it if it is, but do you see AI leaping out of your MDR product and going into other aspects of N-able products to have that same type of multiplier effect?
Yeah. And we do already employ it in a number of our products. We've got it in our data protection product. We've got an AI enabled reboot system, so you can do automatic reboots just to test recovery. One of the things that we hear very regularly is the backup going to be there, right? Like, that's a huge concern. And you can be really confident with this AI driven approach with Cove, and within the RMMs, we've got big investment we made this year was into our developer portal, with what we call our Ecoverse platform, which is kind of one part our products that connect to one another, but also the fact that we're committed to an open platform and connecting into others. We've now got an API developer platform that allows folks to go off and build. If we haven't already built something, they can build some of those connections.
Yeah. No, I'm aware of that. That's fantastic news. If you had to summarize the Horizons report, right, for someone who's looking for a soundbite? I mean, to say it's bullish is kind of misses the point. But I mean, how would you summarize it if you had to?
I would say there's massive opportunity. You got to seize it. And that opportunity, really, there were 3 big growth levers that we heard. Cyber, which is mostly what we talked about, was certainly chief among them. M&A was right there, 1A, 1B. And then a little bit further behind was this co-managed approach. There's massive opportunity for the MSPs that are truly desiring it and willing to build real plans, like numbers and words. You've got a plan that demonstrates what the numbers need to look like for meaningful growth, and you've got the words and the key plays to deliver against it. And you'll be wrong. You'll be wrong on both fronts, but hopefully you're directionally right, and hopefully you're learning quick and failing fast if you need to fail, but you're committed to it. So get committed. I think we heard a lot of committed MSPs. Anybody who's showing up at an event like that is committed. They have a level of commitment to begin with, and we really heard that in droves.
Yeah, I think that's good. If people want to read the report, I'm assuming they can download it or gain access to it online.
Yep. It's available on the website. And if you'd like, I'm sure we can send a link around.
Yeah. Definitely go read the report. I just think I think that it's continued evidence. Not that I need it. I've been doing this for a while. I'm sure your colleagues have been doing it for a long time. I mean, I've already drunk the Kool-Aid, but for others out there that need to know that this is a achievable objective, I think that the report does a good job of succinctly talking about it and saying, look, go after it. I like the way you said it. Opportunity is there if you seize it. If you don't, it's not going to just fall in your lap. It doesn't mean life is just going to be suddenly easy for you this year.
Yeah,
but
exactly. And honestly, it could be a big threat if you don't. So I think you got to be. So many of these MSPs have built a business. It's a wonderful business. They want to pass it down. They want to sell it. They want to do something. But if they're not actually moving forward, they're putting that dream at risk.
Yeah, got to be relevant. Absolutely. All right, Jeff Nulsen from N-able. Go check out the N-able MSP Horizons report on N-able's website. We'll provide a link. Jeff, thanks for coming on the program. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was great. I really appreciate that. You have an awesome rest of your day.